Welcome to the Link Online. And here we are once again in studio, and we have a new and exciting crew with us today. We have Carmel Kilkenny.
Hello there.
And
it's been a while.
It's been a while. Terry Haig is with us once again.
Yes, I am.
And on keyboards once again is Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi, everybody.
And in the control booth, always wondering what's going on here on the other side of the glass, is Chantal Saint-Sauveur, and she's waving and smiling and everything else. And we have a very special guest as well, Sophie Claude Miller. And I am Mark Montgomery. Now, coming up on the show today, Carmel?
Well, Levon, of course, is on another project today, but he left the story from Canada's Minister of International Development. There's now $3.8 billion raised for international girls' education.
All right, Terry?
Geez, I feel guilty about saying this now after that previous one. I'll talk about the Canadian Football League. Jeez.
Well, it's sports, you know. It's
we cover everything.
Got to keep the girls entertained.
You know, it's like that paint company. We cover the world sort of thing. Anyway, I'll be talking about concerns over weaponizing artificial intelligence. And in just a moment, Sophie Claude Miller will talk about an important anniversary in Canada. We'll have those stories coming up on this edition of The Link Online. Well, we're going to start out with our special guest this time around, Sophie Claude Miller. Hello.
Hello.
Now, we should get to, first of all, to explain why you're here. You are with the Radio Canada International Indigenous section, but in this version, it's in French only. Tell us a little bit about it.
Yes, I've joined the team of Espace Autochtone in January. It's in the context of an internship in journalism. Privilege to be able to join the team like that. That made the my entering process easier. Mm-hmm. I think my fellow teammates bring me a lot of their experience that they're sharing with me, but at the same time, I believe that I'm sharing a lot of cultural knowledge, but also all my extensive list of contacts.
Now, of course, now this is, as I said, this is the French version. There's the CBC has an English version of Indigenous stories and websites and so on. Mm-hmm. What is it? What is the Autochtone, Espace Autochtone? What is the purpose? What do they do?
Well, basically, it's really we're reporting the facts. Everything that's new that's going on throughout Canada. We're talking about different events. It could be cultural, it could be sports, and it could cover more politics. Lately, this week, the subject of fake Indian status cards being used for fraud are quite a big subject. But also, we're having a special show on June 21st, which is going to be National Aboriginal Day. So that's quite interesting.
So these are all stories, of course, which have some connection to Indigenous communities across Canada.
Yes.
Now, I mentioned at the beginning as well that this is an important anniversary. This is the 10th anniversary of Canada's official apology for the residential schools. Give us a bit of background on that, because you also have a personal connection to this.
Definitely. I feel personally involved in this because I am an intergenerational survivor. That's how how I'm called, because my father went to residential schools as a child. So I'm Cree from the nation of Waswanipi in James Bay, Quebec. It's between Val-d'Or and Chibougamau. It's about 10 hours drive from Montreal. And basically, my father lived happily in the bush with my grandparents and his brother, my uncle. As a child. And at the age of 6-year-old, basically here in Quebec, the Indigenous people had the right to vote in 1969, 25 years after women. So the thing is that at the time, the government said some people of the government, like previous administrations, when we think about like MacDonald and other prime ministers like that, had a very different view and perspective on Indigenous people as they have today. They wanted to assimilate and basically exterminate us culturally, but also physically. And the thing is that they wanted to educate us to get the Indian out of the person. That was the purpose. Then they didn't hide it. You can still find documents, some quotes from MacDonald that are really clear on the subject. Yeah.
But you have to, at the time, 100 years ago, they thought, theoretically anyway, that this would help assimilate the native population into the wider general modern, in brackets, culture.
Yeah, exactly.
But the way it was it turned out was radically different, terribly different.
Definitely. It was in residential schools, some had a positive experience, but there are very few. Many of them, the vast majority of them, basically faced physical abuse and sexual abuse as well.
And emotional abuse.
Emotional abuse, too. I remember my father telling me a story about Indigenous residential schools, and he stood up in class saying to his classmates, "Oh, I'm starting to lose my Cree, so let's meet at that tree and we'll practice our Cree and speak together." And then one of their students told on him, so he was sent to the hole for a whole month. And, you know, like he
what
was...
What did that mean, to the hole?
It was like a, a confinement. It's a very small, humid, dark room with no windows, obviously. And it was ground level, and they couldn't stand up in that room.
Oh, my.
It's pretty horrific. So
I just want to say, whenever I hear the term, the abuse they suffered, from most of the stories I've heard, the more appropriate term is the torture. It's beyond abuse. It's the horrendous. I mean, they're still trying to track how many children died.
And were covered up in many cases.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, I mean, this is the stories are just horrific in many cases. How did this affect your father? Because you had to live with this.
Definitely. My father, I actually found him in 2000 at the age of 20-year-old. My mother, who's Québécoise, didn't want to raise me with someone who had developed, unfortunately, problems with alcohol. He was an alcoholic.
And this was probably undoubtedly due to his experience.
Definitely. And also, not like growing up in that context, not like really having parental figures around him, didn't make him the best person to communicate his emotions, to how to be a really good father. Like I love him with all my heart, but I mean, there was issues that were there. So in my life, the effect that it had is basically. My father was not part of my life for most part of my life and all my childhood. So I found him only in 2000. So I had to analyze, to understand my own self and to grieve about the whole situation. I had to analyze what happened to him in order to forgive the circumstances and him and what
not
happened.
Blame him for stuff.
Exactly. And to be able to move forward as a young woman as well, becoming an adult.
Now, this was the 10th anniversary of this official apology from the government. What's the sense of that in the Indigenous community? Is it really a big deal? Is it? How does it help or not help?
I believe that for the community, there's a few that are still in denial of that bad things happen in residential schools. Like my own mother said, no, it was okay, and she was kind of blind towards that. And so having the government saying, we apologize, it's to recognize that those horrible things have happened. It's already a step for just saying it happened and we're sorry. That's already big, instead of just being in denial and saying, no, it was fine. We just wanted to provide you education, when there's something way deeper and bigger underneath all that.
Now, the government recently also put a motion in Parliament to ask the Catholic Church, because all the other churches that were involved, because these schools were church-run across the country.
Yes.
And basically the government gave them hands off, and there's just too many stories of these various religious orders, as we've known, taking horrific abuses, sexual, physical, and so on. The other churches have apologized and paid compensation. The Catholic Church so far has kind of avoided this, and the government has asked the Pope to come and apologize, and so far that's been a no-go. What, again, is the perception in the Indigenous community for that?
Personally, in my community, we're closer to the Catholics are really more associated with the Francophone communities, like more the Innu and Algonquin. And in my community, it's more the Christian, Baptist, those religions that are active. So for them, they don't feel concerned, because in their mind, the Catholics are the bad guys. So they don't really relate to the Pope that much. But from the people that are concerned, because I know people other than the people of my community, of course, and we're not surprised, because once the Pope apologizes, obviously, as you mentioned, there's going to be financial compensations that come for that. And so the longer he waits, the longer the victims will have passed, and as well as their children, the intergenerational victims of this. Because I'm already 38, and I mean, many of them are much older. So I think that's, personally, I think it could be a strategy.
Just to sum up then, Sophie Claude, what does a date like this, an anniversary like this, mean to you personally?
For me, it's the sign that the times are changing. There's an era that's behind us, and there's something in front of us. Not all is perfect, and not because of that anniversary. It doesn't mean that there's still no issues, but I mean, we've moved forward, and I believe that for the next generations to come, they will not have to deal with stuff like that. We're really going forward. There's still a lot of work to be done, but at least it's a step in the right direction.
Sophie Claude Miller, thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
All right, you're listening to The Link online, and coming up in just a moment, we're going to talk about weaponizing artificial intelligence. Well, Google, which is heavily involved with creating artificial intelligence, recently said it was going to stop working on certain military projects connected with weapons, and it has created a statement of ethics, which comes after a dozen or so programmers quit and hundreds of others signed a petition against militarized AI. But is this code of ethics and a stance against militarized AI really going to be effective? As Google will work on other military projects, not directly or obviously connected with weaponry. I spoke with Ramona Pringle. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Communication, the Transmedia Zone at Ryerson University in Toronto. I reached her by mobile phone in California. Historically, many innovations not intended for military use ended up becoming weapons.
The thing is, even if it's not Google, another company is going to do this. I mean, unfortunately, when it comes to innovation, just like anything, money talks. And there's always going to be a company that's willing to do that, the military innovation. And as you say, even projects or innovation tools that they come up with that aren't meant for military use will end up being applied for military means. Interestingly, about a year ago or more than a year ago, a number of leaders from the AI community signed an open letter warning that AI weapons could lead to what they called a third revolution in warfare. And what they said, sort of to your point, was that this is a Pandora's box, and once it's opened, it will be hard to close. Sort of just the same way you say once there's dynamite, someone's going to use it. Once there's the atomic bomb, someone's going to use it. Once you've got AI, it's going to be used for military purposes. There's no question about it.
So is this basically a kind of a PR stunt in a way by Google?
Well, interestingly that you ask that. They've just launched right on the heels of the announcement that they wouldn't be renewing their contract with the Pentagon. They launched this code of ethics, and that's what I think has got some people questioning whether or not it could be a PR stunt. Now, granted, I think it does speak to either them doing it with soul searching or just acknowledging that they have to respond to the critics. In a nutshell, they're saying that the AI they develop should benefit society, that it should avoid algorithmic bias, it should be tested for safety, things that I think most people would assume that a company that's developing such advanced AI would be doing already. As for, whether it's a PR stunt, the big question right now, it's one of the recurring challenges we see with all the big tech companies, whether it's Google, Facebook, Amazon. They can make these grandiose pronouncements about how they will do no harm, but they're the ones holding themselves accountable, which means that accountability is somewhat questionable.
Is it possible that there could ever be a real system of ethics for development of AI, given that there are companies around the world? And how do you develop an international set of ethics that somebody would adhere to without an international world government? And that in itself could lead some people to question where we're heading with this.
Absolutely. Well, it's a great question. And, you know, in fact, following that open letter from the leaders who were warning about the dangers of this kind of artificial intelligence weaponry, the United Nations met to discuss the use of autonomous weapons and the possibility to institute an international ban on killer robots. So that's sort of the closest that we've got to any kind of international government or any kind of international force.
Well, Professor Pringle, in a sentence or so, do you think we'll ever be able to control AI completely?
You know, we've watched so many science fiction movies that I think we're always so concerned about the robot uprising. What I would say is when we see bias in algorithms or in machines, when we see them being developed for warfare, it's the humans who are creating them. So I think that's really where our concern needs to lie, is who is creating them, what is their intent. But it's not the robots we need to fear so much as it is the people who are creating them.
And that's an excerpt of my conversation with Ramona Pringle. She's an associate professor in the Faculty of Communication and Design and director of the Transmedia Zone at Ryerson University in Toronto. And as with our other stories today, if you want the full interviews, just go to the website and look in the highlights section. Coming up in just a moment, girls' education.
Well, the recent summit of the G7 leaders in Charlevoix, Quebec, has likely set a record as the most contentious summit in recent history. Wouldn't you agree? Mr.
There's
Trump,
a little bit of a kerfuffle
making
there.
his brief appearance and his dramatic exit. But amid all the drama and bickering about trade, tariffs, and U.S. protectionism, there was one issue that everyone did seem to agree on, and that's girls' education. Canada's managed to raise $3.8 billion to fund the education of girls in developing countries and those in conflict situations. It was perhaps the only tangible result coming out of this summit. Levon Savunts talked to the woman who led Canada's efforts on this file. Marie-Claude Bibeau is Canada's Minister of International Development. She spoke with Levon on the sidelines of the recent Montreal Conference Economic Forum.
Well, I'm very proud, obviously. We had very good discussions, first in Whistler with the Ministers of Development and Finance, and we talked a lot about the importance of considering the full life cycle of a girl, adolescent, and women, because we all agree that if we want empowered women, we need educated girls, and we have to work once again on the barriers that adolescent girls have to face to really complete their education and access to a career or to be able to build a business. We also agree on the fact that we have to have a more gender responsive or gender transformative approach when we are supporting a crisis environment. And one of this gender responsive consideration is really this financial commitment of $3.8 billion for girls' education in crisis environments. So the idea is obviously to provide school and teachers and qualified teachers, but also to look at the environment of the girls, why they are not in school. And it could be because too much, because of violence, because of rape, because of early marriage, because of early pregnancies, because it's not secure to get to school, because there's no sanitary for girls, especially when they have their menstruation, they don't go to school. So there are so many barriers that so it's not possible for them to go to school. So having raised $3.8 billion to provide school and teachers, but also work on all these barriers is really, really, I'm very proud of this, results and commitment.
That was Canada's Minister of International Development, Marie-Claude Bibeau, speaking with Levon Savunts recently.
All right, coming up in just a moment, we're going to be looking at sports. right, we're going to look at football, but not the World Cup football, the other kind of football in North America. That's the Canadian Football League. It's now in motion. It sounds like the song, Backfield in Motion, right?
You remember that song?
I do. I'm old enough.
Yes, you're old enough. Well, it started on Thursday. It's going to run all this weekend, and
there's a new player.
There's a new guy in town.
Yeah,
Johnny come lately. His name is Johnny Manziel. He won the U.S. College's football's biggest prize, the Heisman Trophy, as a freshman at Texas A&M back in 2012, the only freshman to ever win it. Then he ran into a very, very bad patch in his last years of college, and when he turned pro, he was suffering from alcohol and substance abuse problems, as well as what he says was a bipolar disorder. So he managed to play his way out of the National Football League in the U.S. in 2 fraught-filled years, to understate it, to the point that he was out of football last season. Now, he's arrived in Canada. He's going to play for the Hamilton Tiger Cats. He says he's clean. Trouble is, he said that before, and then he has slipped badly. Now, we'll see what happens. But, I mean, it's a star, major star, okay? I spoke to my friend Bruce Dobigan, the award-winning sports writer about and author about Manziel's chances to excel in the CFL.
All right. So, the Heisman Trophy, the last question about Heisman, I made a list of the Heisman trophies. Billy Vessels, way back in 1954, I believe. Johnny Rogers, Flutie, Andre Ware, didn't do that much up here. Ricky Williams, he was okay. He was a good running back, but he wasn't a major star. And he came back here under a cloud. And Troy Smith,
we know what kind of a cloud it was too.
Well, yeah. I mean, but yes, okay. Well, we better explain that for our audience. He was a supporter of smoking marijuana.
There you go.
His time has come.
Supporter, yes.
It's time for him to move back to Canada. And Troy Smith, who was the Heisman Trophy at Ohio State, played with the Alouettes and just was completely ill-suited for the Canadian game. Manziel has the added advantage of looking like one of the all-time greats, I think, Jackie Parker. That might help.
To me, he looks more like Anthony Calvillo. Calvillo could never run, of course, but both guys have kind of got funny bodies. They don't look particularly athletic. I'm talking about Calvillo and Manziel here. They didn't look that way, but he has the ability with his running ability. He also, for a smaller guy, he has a big arm, and it always makes me laugh when I hear Americans say about a quarterback to come up to Canada. Oh yeah, you go up to Canada there because you run, and it might be a good place for you there. You can sort of run around the field and the bigger field and have an advantage. The problem is that because it's a bigger field, you have to have a better throwing arm in Canada than you do in the United States. And that's a problem for a lot of guys who come up here. They think, oh, well, I'll just throw little button hooks and 10 and 15-yard pass patterns. And they find out just how big a CFL field is. So Manziel is a smaller guy, but he does have a strong enough arm to throw the patterns that you have to throw in the CFL.
If you had to put your finger on one thing, what's the greatest asset that the CFL possesses?
Tradition, and certainly in large parts of the country. Outside of Toronto, there's a tradition. Even Montreal, which went dormant for a while, the Alouettes came back. I think it's just that notion that we have a different style of game. It's played. It starts in June. It doesn't start when school starts like all the other football does. It has its own sort of time frame. I think there's something quaint about it. Hopefully, we get a team in the Maritimes, so we go from coast to coast eventually. And it's just that nice mix of Americans and Canadians too, which kind of produces a sort of something goofy. But you don't get superstars who last a long time in the CFL traditionally. So you got to love the game, you got to love the tradition, you got to love the crest on the helmet, and hope that gets you through.
And you'll be watching Thursday night.
I watch all the time. I love to watch CFL football. I think it's a better game than NFL football.
Thank you for doing this, Bruce.
Okay, Darren.
That was part of my conversation with Bruce Dobigan about former Heisman Trophy winner Johnny Manziel's chances of doing well in this year's Canadian Football League, which got underway this week, as we heard, much to Dobigan's pleasure. One thing to keep in mind here now, they brought Manziel up to juice the gate, right? I mean, he's a star.
Now, you have to explain juice the gate to people who are not into sports dialogue.
Know what that means. Put fannies in the seats. Okay.
Bring in the crowds.
Yeah, he's playing in Hamilton. All right. Now, The problem is the former Heisman Trophy winner, he's going to start the season carrying a clipboard on the sidelines because they already have a good quarterback through the Tiger Cats, Jeremiah Mazzoli. So we have no idea what's going to happen. Maybe Menzel only plays a couple of plays a game, or maybe they've come up with some interesting plays for him, put him on at flanker or something, do some end arounds, let him do some reverses. But so how does he juice the gate by standing on the sidelines? Although I saw him play an exhibition game against Montreal last week. He's good. The guy's really good. And the thing is, he's a really charming kid, you know. I mean, of course. I mean, he had it all. He had it in Texas where they breed quarterbacks. He doesn't look that big to me. But
Is that where he's from? Texas?
From Texas, yeah. He played at Texas A&M. And it's going to be really, I mean, he blew it. And he blew it big time. I mean, he was a party guy because he's so, I mean, I had the same problem, you know, he's charming.
But you didn't have the money.
Or the arm. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. If he keeps his trap shut, people get hurt in football, so he'll get his chance maybe.
How old is he now?
I think he's about 24, 25, something like that.
A little wisdom setting in, maybe.
Maybe.
And if he understands, this is a second chance.
It's his last chance.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Last chance.
It's his last chance.
But you know, Dobigan says something interesting. I think the Canadian football game is much better than the American.
It is. It's way better. It's way better.
But speaking of tradition, you know that tailgate parties started here.
Really?
In the 40s.
There
in
you
Toronto,
go.
I believe.
Where? Right here in Montreal?
Yeah, I think it was in Toronto.
Yeah.
Stanley Cup, excuse me.
Grey Cup.
That's the hockey award. The Grey Cup. It was sometime in the 40s. Yeah. Yep.
Oh, it's our brush with greatness then.
Well, yeah.
As Canadians. Okay, so we invented the tailgate party.
Well, we actually sort of also invented American football, you know. I mean,
and basketball.
Because it was the McGill team. It was the McGill team. Decades and
played Harvard. The first intercollegiate football game was between McGill and Harvard.
That's right. And Harvard said, you guys play a more interesting game. So they started to adopt some of the Canadian rules, and that's how American football came to be.
Yeah, because I don't think you could pass in those days. I think you just had to run.
It was like a mixture of, because British rugger was sort of mixed in there as well. So,
and basketball, as Carmel mentioned, was invented by a Canadian. However, he was teaching at Springfield College in Massachusetts.
Yeah, but
he's Canadian.
But he played it here too.
Did he? I thought he.
Yeah,
really?
No, they played it. I mean, he was working on the game, developing it.
See again. We are on the cutting edge.
Ball into fruit baskets.
Yeah, that's right. Real baskets. They put real baskets.
Here's a question for you. Here's a question for you, Terry. When he invented that game, the Canadian.
Which one?
Basketball.
Okay.
They set
short memory.
They set the baskets up on the gym there, and it happened to be 10 feet high.
That's right.
And that's never changed.
Nope.
Even though at the time, the average height of a player was probably 7-8 inches shorter than now.
Yep.
And now you've got these guys who are like 6'7", 6'8", 6'10", and they can just reach up. I mean, should they
you
not?
Got to reach over somebody 6'10" too. That's the problem.
Should they not though raise the baskets?
No, I don't think so either.
Even when you're growing up, even when you're growing up, you learn from the time you're 5 years old. It's like, do you want to change the hockey rink, the hockey size of the hockey nets? Don't kids grow up playing on full-size nets? With full-size nets in Canada? I believe they do.
Yeah, but the size of the nets doesn't change the size of the player. In that sense,
the size of the player changes in front of that net. The goalies are way smaller.
But if you were playing basketball like 100 years ago or whenever,
I did.
You couldn't reach up. Now you can. Some of these guys reach up. It's almost.
Yeah, but the point is that the defensive guys,
exactly.
The defensive guys are just as big. I mean, it's not that easy to do.
How about that World Cup football in?
Yeah.
What sport is that?
Football.
Okay.
Football. Well, I have to laugh because the other language sections in RCI are watching the game. And so every once in a while, you'll be working away on a computer, and the big cry goes up from one of the other languages.
You realize how many other people are watching the beautiful game.
It's the biggest sporting event in the world, I believe.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is indeed. And
we're going to get it in Canada. A few games in Canada.
2026 is coming.
United bid, Mexico, U.S., and Canada.
So we must be having one of those games in Montreal.
But we've got to see. They say they're going to revamp the Olympic Stadium. But what I want to know is, maybe you guys know, and how much is it like the Olympics? I mean, does it wind up costing us money?
Of course.
Yeah, so
But then again, we make it back. It's like
we
the
or don't
Formula
we?
One, right? F1, the money that comes into the city.
yeah,
apparently.
for a week, yeah. Crescent Street,
leaves
which is
us
our
in
main,
the black.
Yeah, it keeps 40% of their
And
business.
we are the only place on the circuit where the party is in the city, not at a ticketed event out somewhere.
Hey, we're on the cutting
Montreal,
edge.
there we go.
There it-
Canada.
Our kind of town.
Montreal Formula One. Great stuff. Oh, listen, you know what?
Formula One. You call that a sport?
Did you hear
Yes, I do.
I live in the west end of the
We
city.
got
and
15 seconds.
the zing of the cars in the middle of the night. Zing, zing.
Well, listen, we have to go. So, Carmel, thank you very much. Terry, thank you.
Pleasure.
Marie-Claude, thank you. And Chantal and Silva, thank you very much. We're out of time. Take care till next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.